So evolution is just change over time. These changes don't necessarily resemble progress. They resemble genetic shifts. Genetic changes which better fit the present environment, which allows an organism to be successful. As we studied in ecology, Earth has a finite set of resources, and those who are successful at getting those resources will continue to survive and reproduce, while those who are outcompeted will die and their genes will disappear. You can also imagine that social dynamics are going to influence who lives. Therefore, these continual changes in environment and society results in what we call noisy data. It's termed for the many peaks and valleys when it's plotted as a line graph because it looks like somebody had way too much coffee as they were trying to draw a line. Evolution, plotted as a line graph, is not like your growth as a single human being over time. We're not plotting the life of one being. We are plotting lives of hundreds of thousands of beings over the course of 5.7 million years. So let's begin. Moreover, the evolution of some skeletal morphologies is more important than others. In this lecture, I've removed the insignificant data, and I'm going to help you sort through this noisy data. By the end of this, you should be able to explain how the lifestyles of hominoids changed with time based on their skeletal morphologies from the fossil record. As we progress in these slides, you'll see more information. Instead of repeating this information that you see, I'll be elaborating on its meaning. You can feel free to stop the video to take notes, write a question, etc., but don't copy the slides. Use the slide as a foundation. Add something that isn't already here. Let's begin with Artie. So, while Artie did have enormous eyebrows like his ape and chimp counterparts, they had a very small cranial capacity, only about 22% of ours. The skeleton suggests that there was a lot of time upright, but the arms and clasping toe suggest we still slept and spent a lot of time in the trees, especially with only being 4 foot in stature. The Australopithecines, these are the southern apes. This is the famous Lucy who came about 400,000 years after Artie. We often lack complete specimens of these skulls, as seen up in here, but scientists take what we do have and they infer what we don't have. A fascinating thing about Lucy is that the species begins with the same brain capacity as Artie, but over the next 2 million years of their existence, the brain capacity nearly doubles, strongly suggesting that the brain's ability was unable to navigate the increased challenges of social and environmental forces, requiring the brain to be larger in order to be successful. But to pinpoint how the smaller brain was unfit, you must measure the sections of the brain which increased. The much smaller canines indicate a stronger focus on fruit and nuts and a reduction on ripping and tearing flesh. The species is bigger. Isn't it so great? My little baby's growing up. She's grown a whole 9 inches. This is fantastic. But no more can she swing from the trees because we've lost that grasping toe. We've become more bipedal. But the upper body is still strong and can climb up in the trees. So what do you think this means for their daily life? If we saw Lucys in their natural habitat, they would spend the early mornings and evenings foraging for fruits and nuts in the trees and down on the forest floor, kind of how you see here. The days would be spent walking across tropical grasslands, savannas, from isolated forest to isolated forest, and they were still going to sleep in the trees. Take this time to pause and check in with your understanding how the morphologies are evolving and what it means. Please pause the video now and see if you can answer these questions or maybe write a few questions of your own. Okay, I hope you're back and ready to move on. We can see that the fossil record has gaps here. We don't have enough skulls to show us how the morphology was year to year or even species to species. And this has everything to do with the wet grasslands and forests in which these species were living. The vegetation, rodents, charismatic megafauna, that means the really big, pretty animals like saber-toothed kitties, and perhaps even these hominoids would eat bones as a source of calcium. The preservation of bone in these environments was very difficult, which also explains why we rarely find chimpanzee and ape bones, being that they live in tropical forests, and the bone has rare chance for fossilization there. Pleistocene hominids. These are the much more us-like hominoids because they walk upright and share our diet, so we call them hominids. Their bipedalism indicates that there was no longer safety in the trees. Maybe there were no trees, maybe the trees got infested by leprechauns. We'll have to find out by taking a look at the bones. So let's focus on how we can interpret these environmental changes from the noisy changes we see in the bones. Homo habilis, they spent their time walking upright, and they are living in the grasslands. We see this from the pelvis structure and also by their foot and their spine. The reduction in average height suggests they were malnourished. How could environmental or social forces have caused this? Do you have any ideas? The ability to become tool users is often connected with the increased area at the frontal lobe. When we take a look at their skulls have larger post-orbital constriction. So as the post-orbital area increases, it gives more space for the frontal lobe at the very front of the brain case. Becoming tool users allowed the species to continue finding food and was probably one of the sole reasons that the species did not go extinct. However, just because I could use tools didn't mean that they were any good at it, as the species was cat food. They were a common prey of the saber-toothed kitty. So you know the ridiculous comics where a caveman is banging rocks together inside of a cave, lights a stick on fire, and then says, "Ugh, make fire!" Yeah, that's this guy. Only he wasn't doing it in a cave. He was doing it in a small stand of trees to cook the meat, fruits, nuts, and the leaves of some plant that was gathered, most likely that day. The brain here increases by about 38% over 500,000 years from Homo habilis. This is the strongest and most rapid growth in hominoid history. The rough times most likely naturally selected this species, while those without the big brain genetics were probably eaten by kitties. Homo erectus was the tallest species of our entire history. Both genders were taller on average than common man. Not just me, I mean all of us. Homo sapiens, or ancient us's, if you want to say that. The cranium here increases only by about 19% from Homo erectus, and although the height decreases by an inch for both genders, let's consider that noise and consider the two having the same height. But the ear, the genetics for our ears, yours and mine, is about 600,000 years old, and we can see it because the morphology inside pretty much matches ours. The diet remains relatively the same from Homo erectus. It's cooked meat and raw or cooked fruits, nuts, grains, and vegetables. So, interesting question for you. As we've been eating cooked meat in foods for about 1.8 million years, has our digestive system evolved, or is there some fact to the Paleolithic diet which suggests only fruits and nuts are acceptable and nothing should be cooked? Yeah, these guys have a huge nasal area, but also a larger brain size than ours. But that doesn't mean smarter. Theirs is larger in the back at the occipital lobe, so they're more visually stimulated. But that doesn't mean necessarily attractive. Back here is the occipital region. We don't have this kind of bun, this addition that Neanderthals have, but we have more here. And my question for you is, how long until we turn out like Neanderthals if we don't go outside and play more? Because we play video games, and I make you watch these interesting videos. We can see these differences in the morphology. The Neanderthal is larger at the back versus Homo sapiens, where we are wider at the post-orbital constriction at the front. We also have more of an orognathic face, whereas theirs bulges. This also allows them to have a massively giant schnoz. But what do all these mean? How does morphology suggest functionality? At this time in Earth's history, ice ages with cold, snow, and whiteouts, a larger surface area in the nose permitted them to smell things more easily, and the stress on the brain from straining to see things through the snow focused more brain growth in the occipital region. Any slight increases in the ability to smell the campfire or see the mountains through the snow would determine the continuation of those genetics. Yet many other possibilities exist for the continuation of these genes. What can you think of? Bring these ideas to class. Take a moment, pause the video again, so you can write about the significance of being the tallest and what time did the hominids want to cook food, maybe why they had to learn to cook food. All right, here we go. Final stretch. So then you have us, true us's, Homo sapiens sapiens. We came about in Ethiopia just under 200,000 years ago. Our skull has not changed very much since then, peaking about 20,000 years ago and then slightly reducing since. For skeletal features, look at your own body, because really these guys are you and you are them. One of the things I find really fascinating is that we are a product of the mixing of Neanderthal and Homo sapiens archaic genes. Isn't that bizarre? I mean, this is us, and we're, well, maybe not with that much hair, but yeah, this is us. It's a mix of Neanderthal and archaic Homo sapiens. Fascinating. When we take a look at this graph of Pleistocene, recent hominids, we can see a strong difference from the last map, which was plagued with gaps in the record. These hominids are much more recent and lived in drier conditions, so the bones haven't broken down, whereas the older hominids lived in wet forests with chimps and apes where the bones get broken down very easily in the moisture. And this tree of ancestry also shows us the mixing of Neanderthal and archaic species, which ends up creating you and me. Please bring your questions to class or to a help session, and look forward to talking with you about this.